this is the Hendrick Hudson School Board of Education meeting. Can I get a motion to open the meeting, please?
Motion.
All right. At this time, the Hendrick Hudson Board of Education will convene an executive session for the purpose of collective negotiations under the Taylor Law, medical, financial, credit, or employment history of a particular person or corporation, or matters leading to the appointment or employment history of a particular person or corporation, or matters leading to the appointment or promotion or demotion or discipline, or suspension or removal of a particular person or corporation. I'm going to take one step back. All in favor of opening the meeting, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Can I get a motion to enter executive session, please?
So moved.
Whatever. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we'll reconvene at approximately 7 p.m. Good evening. Tonight is Monday, November 8th, and this is the Hendrick Hudson School Board of Education meeting. The board has just left the executive session and we're now back in public. Can we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as stated? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Does anybody have anything to pull from the consent agenda this evening?
I do. I'd like to pull section 3.3, the fiscal section, please. In particular, the corrective action response.
Okay, so we're going to pull section 3.3, the corrective action response. Anybody else? Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as stated? Can I get a second? All in favor? All right, that brings us to our items removed from the consent agenda. We'll start with fiscal 3.3.
So my question that I wanted to discuss with this particular item is for the public to just understand what the corrective action plan is. And then also, well, I guess we can start with that. But then also the other part was comment number 1 with regard to the tax stabilization reserve. I was just wondering if we could go over again what that is and how it works.
Good evening, everyone. The corrective action plan is a plan that the district has to put together, meaning Joe and I, for any of the comments in our external audit. As you can see, most of the comments are in the area of having some problems with the extracurriculum activity funds, but minor problems, but still need some work there. And the rest are the one that you mentioned about the unassigned fund balance. By law, school districts cannot have more than 4% of the unassigned fund balance. And we have about 18%, and the reason we have so much is because of our problem that we're getting with Indian Point. We are using that fund, that unassigned fund balance, so we can draw on in the future to have tax levies that will not go northern than 5 to 6%. So that's the reason that we consciously have decided to keep the fund balance above the 4% that is required by law.
Okay, thank you very much, Enrique. That's the only question I have.
Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to approve fiscal item 3.3? Can I get a second? All in favor? Aye. The second item that was removed from the consent agenda is a donation. It's a donation for a pop-up tent totaling $880 for the Hendrick Hudson Track and Field Program. This was donated by Claudia Vieta on behalf of Yuca's Latin Fusion Restaurant. Thank you very much for that generous donation. I am sure that the participants on the track team will greatly appreciate it, as they don't have to stand out in the sun and or rain. Can I get a motion to approve that donation?
So moved.
Can I get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That will bring us to our superintendent's report.
Okay, a few updates. We're going to start with pre-K. It was last April that our Assemblywoman and State Senator notified us that Hendrick Hudson, for the first time ever, is going to qualify and receive pre-K funds from New York State as part of the education budget. And we celebrated, and that was something very exciting for our community. And then we read the fine print, and what we realized is that the funding aimed toward Hendrick Hudson, and in fact, many school districts throughout Westchester, throughout Long Island, even Rockland and Putnam and Dutchess, we were woefully underfunded. And the reason we say that is because what New York State did is they agreed to a universal per pupil expense for pre-K, statewide. What we do know is that expenses downstate or the lower Hudson region, and certainly Long Island, it's more expensive to educate students in this part of the state than the other parts of the state. So we first did some math in terms of the budget, and we realized that it would be a really significant uphill battle to try to provide pre-K either in the district or working with an outside partner at that number. We receive approximately $5,000 per student for pre-K. We spend in our education system upwards of $20,000 or more to educate students K through 12. So we were already a little upside down. Because the budget got approved at the time that it did, this board had already basically finished our budget priorities for the current school year last March and April, and we were not in a position to add any local dollars to supplement the universal pre-K funding. Margaret and her team worked very closely with officials from New York State and with providers within our community to determine if they could work with us to use these resources to provide universal pre-K. After discussions with the state, discussions with our attorneys, we had a few providers that have been operating in our community for quite some time. They inquired, Margaret met with them, had a number of conversations, and unfortunately, for a number of reasons, and absolutely none of those reasons were ours, but for a number of reasons, those providers cannot meet the New York State requirements to partner with us. So two things. One, we don't have the resources on the local end and through New York State to offer pre-K this year, and the partners did not meet the baseline criteria to be approved by New York State. Just as an aside, Margaret was, and I'm saying everything she was supposed to say, so I'll turn it over to you in a second, but she was speaking with folks from the state, and I think a school in the Bronx that receives over $20,000 per child to provide pre-K. So we are using that information to advocate for more money for the Lower Hudson region, but certainly if this group, if the board is interested in exploring pre-K as a budget item for next year, Margaret and her team are working on that. But what we do know is that $5,000 per child is certainly not adequate to give anyone in our region a competitive pre-K experience. So with that, I'll turn it over to Margaret because she's been working very hard with our partners and our attorneys and community on this, and again, maybe I said everything, so I apologize.
Not a problem. You did practically say everything. I will remind everyone, though, that even if we pick up this flag next year and try to bring it home and cross the touchdown line, we still are required by law to collaborate with a local agency to a minimum of 10%. So we still have things to look at. Our collaborators were disappointed that they couldn't meet some of the needs that were put forth. I think they would have been great partners, and I hope that by next year they are in a better place to address those needs. And and we would look forward to collaborating with them to try to meet the needs of all of the district's pre-K students. So that's where we stand right now.
I'm not sure who would answer. Thank you. Is there a way we can do an abbreviated program? Because I'm speculating that this is a use it or lose it on the 5,000 per child.
Yes, you do lose the funding. It doesn't carry forward.
So we're just, okay, so we're kind of losing it. Is there a way to do an abbreviated program with the qualified teachers, but on not a full-time basis possibly?
Right now,
It's starting in January, I don't know.
and it would have to be in the district.
Okay,
So what would happen is the funding is prorated, so if it's a half-year program, it's half of 5,400.
okay, does it say how many hours it has to be?
It has to be a full school day, they have to meet this, we have to match the school calendar.
So 5 days a week,
Yes.
right? Okay, so we
Honor
can't
school.
do an abbreviated.
Right. Yeah, it can't be a half day. I will tell you that I've been on many, many, many phone calls this year, and the very first one we all did, almost as a region, everyone new to the process was disappointed that it had to be full day. And that is a new requirement. So if a district like White Plains, who's been getting money for many years, their old money permitted them to do this on a half-day model, and they could continue that, but the new money requires a full-day experience. So for us, even if we were able to take the money, remember that they only funded 34 seats. I think Carmen helped me do this count. We were up to maybe 76 pre-K students right now in the district for this year. So we would not have been able to meet the needs of all kids, which means it then becomes a lottery. It's a very complicated, it seems very simple, but it's very complicated, and there is a tremendous amount of accountability associated with it on the back end for us. All of which is worth it, I might add, but nonetheless, it's not, even when they say UPK, it's most often not UPK for all. Now, maybe the legislation that is sitting in Congress now may change that. If that gets passed, I don't know, but right now, the way the funding sits, we would not be able to touch all of our kids.
Okay, so basically the state is saying we're giving you money, but you have to pick up 75% of the tab,
Yes.
approximately.
We're not required, like, when we said to our collaborators, we're willing to give you whatever the state gave us and pass it through, but we're not adding anything, and we're not required to do so.
And the timing of when the state notified us that UPK was going to be in our budget, our local budget process was basically done, but I think the price tag was around 300,000 of local dollars to go with the pre-K dollars to have a district program. Is that
I don't remember.
in the
what
neighborhood?
was
Yeah.
estimated. It sounds reasonable.
And that's part of the problem, is that oftentimes school districts have their budgets approved by law before we know what the funding is from the state, whether it's BOCES or foundation aid or any of these line item grants. So we got the information too late, and the Superintendent's Council advocated for more funding. I know Westput did, and the School Boards Association, but that was the only way to get it done. The only way to get it done with all the lawmakers approving was that it was a universal formula throughout the state, and those dollars just don't go as far here.
Good, thank you.
Next one, sorry. The decommissioning fund award. We received notice from Governor Hochul that the school district is poised to receive $500,000 to be used for safety and security endeavors as Holtec begins to decommission Indian Point. These $500,000 come from a $15 million pot of money that has been sitting in escrow with New York State. When Indian Point announced their closure in January 2017, one of the agreements was that Indian Point, or Entergy at the time, had to create a community fund of $15 million. The community fund had some very loose terms in terms of with respect to who could access those funds. But as Indian Point moved along and stopped producing energy, and ultimately as Entergy sold it to Holtec, the state now is basically awarding these grants. So the town of Cortland received money, the village of Buchanan, Riverkeeper, and the school district. So the money sits in escrow in New York State. It is not a check that we will receive. It's not an action that we will receive $500,000 and put in our general fund or fund balance. It basically behaves like a grant. The money is available to us. They will put together the terms and conditions and how we can access it, for what we can use those dollars for, and then we would apply to New York State and basically draw down on that $500,000. But the intent is for security and safety endeavors regarding the decommissioning. We've had a number of meetings over the last number of months with the New York State Task Force, of which I'm a member. There have been some preliminary discussions about purchasing air quality monitors, water testing apparatus, not only just at BV, that obviously is the closest school to the plant, but perhaps all of our schools. Just as peace of mind and to make sure that families feel comfortable sending their kids to our schools while decommissioning is happening. So that's one potential use of the funds. We'll also continue to work with the various consultants that the state government has provided us, independent from any of the agencies, but an independent consultant to advise us as we get closer. So that's good news. $500,000 is 13 times less than what Riverkeeper is getting, and there is a gentleman, a parent that we've been working with who basically said that the fish get 13 times more than the kids. That is the math, but we did not play a role in how these dollars were allocated. That was a function of the governor and her team. So nonetheless, something is better than nothing, and as we learn more about the potential uses of these dollars, certainly we'll continue to work with the state and other safety consultants on what the best use of these funds are. And the last update I had was it was answered through Lisa's question and some of Enrique's answers, so I won't go back to the audit, but I will mention our strategic plan process. Back in October, we asked for community members and various stakeholders to indicate interest to participate in our strategic plan process. Just as a reminder, this was an initiative we were to launch in the 2016-17 school year, and in January 2017 is when Indian Point announced their closure. So the board at the time made the decision to pause on the multi-year, long-term planning forecast to really worry about today, tomorrow, and next month. And that was a wise decision. So now that some of those efforts are behind us and we're ready to turn the corner and look at our next 3 to 5 year plan, we asked for community participation. We had about 70 staff, parents, and community members sign up. And while we're excited that 70 people identified interest because they are going to commit quite a bit of time and effort to this process, we also know that we need to make sure that our participation is as equitable and as diverse as our students and our population. So last Friday we put out another call for folks to learn more information and get involved, and it's a very exciting time to be part of the future and to be able to dream a little bit about where we go over the next number of years. Obviously, it's no secret that Indian Point has forced upon us some conversations that were unpopular, and conversations that and decisions that were very consequential, but participating in the strategic plan will really be about the future of our district. So it's really an exciting time. Part of the information that we'll use to drive this plan are going to be surveys and interviews and focus groups. In fact, we're putting together a list of focus groups with students and staff. Surveys will go out to stakeholders, including recent graduates, to learn about their experience and what improvements we could make or how we could improve our programs or opportunities for students. So this is going to be a very significant project. So the more the merrier, that can help us move this along, and ultimately the role of the board will be to adopt some of those recommendations in full, adopt some but not others, and ultimately I would say 9 times out of 10 these recommendations are going to come with a financial ask. The strategic plan is not just a document that sits on the shelf, but it's actionable, and this body will need to decide if we're going to allocate resources to make that plan a reality. For those who were part of our previous strategic plan included huge infrastructure improvements in technology, in facilities, in performing arts spaces, and resources for students, and supplies and equipment. So it's not a zero-sum document. There will be some decisions that we need to make, and we'll need to prioritize those decisions vis-a-vis our budget and what our projected revenues look like. So very exciting time. The facilitators have agreed and feel it's important to come and give an update to the board and community. So we're going to see when they're in town next to facilitate some in-person training and opportunities for our various teams. And we'll try to line that up during a time that we meet as a board so they can come and give everyone an update.
How do people volunteer for this?
So on our website and on Facebook is our call to get involved, and there's a link to a very basic Google survey. Basically your name, your affiliation, email address, and a couple open-ended questions so the facilitators have an idea of what your interests are, and then they would softly recommend what team to join or what those groups will be doing, so that whatever folks' interests are, they can work to their strengths. But online and Facebook.
Do you need to have children in the district in order to participate?
You do not. And in fact, we have a number of folks that, one of two things, either their children have graduated. We had a meeting today at 5 o'clock, and I did an interview with a parent of a former student who still lives here, who graduated 11 years ago. We have another individual on the committee who moved here within the last 5 years to be closer to their grandchildren. So they know nothing about the district but want to be involved. So anyone and everyone, but it is limited to community members of our district or staff.
Okay. Do you need to speak English in order to participate?
You do not. Everything will be translated. I even think the survey has been translated, and there's some specific outreach that we're working with our ENL teachers and some of our counselors to make sure that information gets to those children. So,
My last question. Do you need to be available during the daytime in order to be a participant in the strategic plan?
you do. We're going to have meetings and workshops, and the groups will be working during the day and evening on weekends. That's really a negotiation with all of the members. But some of this work, it's inevitable that it needs to happen during the day. So as folks get closer to, or if they indicate their interest in participating, they'll have basically a 1-hour overview of the process, talk about some of the expectations and time commitment of various groups, and then they can decide which one is best for them.
You mentioned about focus groups happening, Joe. Can you talk a little bit more about how those are going to be set up and when we should be expecting to hear about them, and how people can volunteer for those as well?
Yeah, so the focus groups we're starting, actually, Margaret and I talked about it today. The principals have identified students by grade level, making sure that they are representative of their school community. There's a standard set of 5 questions. It's actually, I believe they call it an empathy survey. And it's a 30-minute conversation where the interviewer, who are members of these committees, will go through the standard 5 questions and write down as much as they can, and then they will upload their responses to a database. So that information, based on phrases or certain words, the qualitative piece of that submission can become quantitative in terms of some keywords and phrases. We're also working to identify, start with some staff focus groups, and the ideal focus group is between 3 and 5 individuals. And we're also going to be reaching out to recent graduates as well. And that will be accompanied by various surveys that take place afterwards as well.
And I believe there's also family groups for K through 5 students and middle school and
Oh, yeah.
high school as well, right?
Yep. So families will have an opportunity to participate, to make sure we get some, really make sure we have some qualitative data. So some interviews and hear some stories and hear some recommendations in addition to, hopefully what we'll receive is thousands of pieces of information from the survey and be able to connect the two together.
Can board members or their families participate?
The recommendation through surveys and focus groups, yes. You're going to get an email from me eventually that's going to say fill out this survey. If you're selected for a focus group, I would say participate. In terms of the committee work, it's not recommended, and the reason is because this body will end up making decisions on that work, and it's important that the process is sanitized as possible, because you're going to either vote up or vote down an initiative, and you're either going to apply funding to it or not. And so to have a decision maker making the sauce could send the wrong message to the people participating. You want to be as balanced and objective as possible. So all of the information, like the PowerPoints that were shared, I believe Carol sent it out. We'll have some presentations so everyone can understand the process. But in terms of active participation, I think it's important that this group remain objective as possible, because it's really the work of the board to say, yes, we agree with this, we're going to go left, we're going to go right, and we're going to allocate X number of dollars to these projects, which really means we're going to perhaps not fund projects that we always have traditionally. We're going to have to make those tough choices.
Does anybody else have any questions before we move on? All right, that brings us to our audience comments on agenda items. Because we feel community engagement is important, the Hendrick-Hudson Board of Education welcomes public comment during this portion of the meeting. Please note that the public comment period is not designed to be a discussion. The board is here to listen. Please do not expect the board to respond to your concerns and questions this evening. This is because the board trustees and the superintendent take your comments seriously and want to have sufficient time to thoroughly process your comments and to research issues if need be. We will consider your comments as well as we deliberate at future meetings, or we'll have the proper staff member follow up with you at a later date as appropriate. To maintain an orderly meeting, the board has allotted 15 minutes for each public comment section, which may be extended by board consensus. Guidelines for those wishing to address the board are as follows. Each speaker should have signed in with the district clerk prior to the comment section and will be called in the order in which they have signed up. We would ask that groups designate one individual to speak on their behalf. It is not permitted to cede your time to another speaker. When called, please step up to the podium and begin by stating your name and affiliation if applicable. Letters, petitions, or other written material should be handed to the district clerk prior to your comments. All comments must be directed to the board. Each speaker is permitted 3 minutes for their comments and must be recognized by the board president. The board vice president will be timing comments. We'll give a 30-second warning to the speaker with a yellow card and indicate when the speaker's time is finished with a red card. The board may limit repetitive comments in order to give time to participants wishing to speak on varied topics, as well as to maintain meeting efficiency. Although we take personal concerns and individual student matters very seriously, the board is not permitted to address these in open session. And in open session as per state and federal privacy laws. We would ask that you use appropriate administrative channels for these items. The board expects comments to be made without interference from the audience and in a civil manner so that our meeting can serve as a model of appropriate civil discourse for our students. In the unlikely event the meeting becomes unruly, the board may recess the meeting until order can be restored. Please remember, if you prefer not to participate in the public comment portion of the meeting, written comments to the Board of Education may be submitted in lieu of speaking. Please see the agenda or the district website for contact information. We will now begin our public comment period on agenda items. Carmen, do we have any speakers signed up?
We do have one speaker tonight. It's Mrs. Amy Galinko.
Ms. Blanco?
Good evening. Oh, can anyone hear me?
Try again.
Okay, try again. Okay, is that better? Yes. Thank you. Good evening. Amy Galinko from Steep Indian Point Demolition. Last month, my husband Dan stood before you to discuss the health and safety risks facing students and staff due to the demolition of Indian Point. At that time, you assured everyone of the board's concern for safety. However, our confidence in that has been weakened. Public forums exist for asking difficult questions of those in power. Late last month, the Decommissioning Oversight Board held a public meeting. The superintendent is a member of the decommissioning oversight body and has the perfect seat from which to advocate for safety, but we didn't hear anything. Even if the board disagrees with me and 170 families in my group that there is risk to BB Elementary, you have to at least acknowledge that it would only take one bad day or one bad hour for our concerns to be validated and all of our lives to be changed irrevocably. Therefore, I'm using my 3 minutes to share questions that could have been asked at the meeting in service to this community. Maybe one day our community will be on the oversight board and ask the questions ourselves. Questions for Holtec and the NRC. Can you look me in the eye and promise me that no fugitive airborne dust will leave the site throughout the demolition? What is your track record of dust control at 4,000 feet? Why is tenting a building during demolition an appropriate safety measure in New York's financial district, but not here? In contrast to a skyscraper, Indian Point is filled with highly toxic and radioactive substances. Please share a budget on tenting. Are workers or visitors permitted at the Indian Point facility without personal protective equipment? Because BB is 4,000 feet from the domes and just a quarter of that to the gate. A couple of questions for Governor Hochul's office. Is $500,000 for monitoring enough? Please share a budget analysis for state-of-the-art, real-time radiation and air monitoring. What happens if it costs $1.5 million? Who will pay for that shortfall? And to be clear, thank you for the award, but as my husband mentioned earlier, fish conservation got $6.5 million, as Mr. Hochreiter said. Why did you give 13 times more to schools of fish? And to Enbridge, pipeline company, why is there zero security around the exposed natural gas pipeline on Broadway at the Indian Point fence? This is happening right now. We know the 26-inch pipe is out of service for maintenance, but the 30-inch line is right next to it and could be sabotaged for devastating effect while unguarded. How far apart are the two pipes? We all missed an opportunity to put Enbridge on the spot about this. As I said earlier, public forums exist for asking difficult questions like these of those in power. So now I ask the board, when you say you really care about health and safety, please show us more. Address it at each meeting, advocate for it in public and private, and demonstrate you are as invested in the safety of your schools as we are. Please obtain and report answers to the questions posed here tonight. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much for your comments and for coming this evening. She was the only speaker. All right, that brings us to our committee reports. The audit committee met and we saw the results of that this evening. Any other committees?
I do want to mention the facilities committee is going to meet right before Thanksgiving, Monday before Thanksgiving. They'll be doing a review of the school visits that board members did back in August or September. We're also going to be talking about our energy performance contract that ultimately will be a presentation here in December. And Enrique is going to share some information to start with the committee about retiring debt and different capital projects that we are finishing or wrapping up in the next couple of years paying for. We are off cycle. In fact, it was about 5 years ago, this time of year, we did a building condition survey. That is a mandated independent analysis that every school district needs to conduct of their facilities, from HVAC to plumbing to technology infrastructure to sidewalks and playgrounds. rather than having every school district in the state do that building condition survey every 5 years in the same year, the state got smart and they staggered everyone. So we're still a couple years away from our building condition survey, but those are going to be some topics for an upcoming facilities meeting on the Monday before Thanksgiving. And then we'll have a report back in December.
I just have a quick question about that. So I think a while ago we said we were allocating funding for lighting and sound in the high school auditorium. Just wondering how that was going.
Yeah, so we'll be able to provide an update in December, all things facilities, capital project. Yep.
And I'll make sure that's included.
Yep.
Carol, I have a report. I attended a meeting this morning on behalf of Westchester Putnam School Board Associations that was organized with Senator Pete Harcum. And we were discussing regional public educational issues and shared local data of what is needed for our school districts. He remains very committed to listening to the school districts and to working with us to try to, make things better for all of us. Topics we covered ranged from requests for Department of Health to make metrics for us on the end game with COVID, like when we could begin loosening restrictions on mask wearing and that kind of thing. So he heard that loud and clear. There were quite a few districts that were requesting that kind of help, and also in line with the stated test things that are coming out of the county as well. So we just need more clarity on those and funds to go along with them if they're going to be requiring those kinds of things from us. So we made that point loud and clear. We also talked about financial assistance with the COVID testing and help with money for infrastructure for our buildings many of the buildings in Westchester County are quite old, like our high school. And with ventilation and broadband and that kind of thing. So it was a very good conversation, and there were about 30 of us on the phone call this morning. So great.
Thank you, Lisa, for participating in that. Thank you, Lisa, for participating in that call. Anybody else have any committee reports this evening? All right, so that brings us to our board comments, new business section. Or you want to say something?
Just one quick question. We talked about, I know this is supposed to be part of our overall planning, but one of the things we talked about was updating the vision and mission just to be more inclusive. But I just wanted to get some sort of timeline as to when we would be doing that.
That would be part of the strategic plan process, whatever, in terms of data coming out of surveys or focus groups. That certainly would be a priority, and I think in one of our retreats we said that we'd make sure that comes out of that work.
So are we saying it's going to be at least a year before we can update?
No, we'll receive a draft plan. I think our timeline calls for March or April, and then to me that would be, as we identify our next 3 to 5 year goals, would be to use that as an opportunity to say, do our next 3 or 5 years goals still match a vision and mission statement that was written a decade ago? The answer is probably no, and then that's when that work would.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. If nobody else has new business, then that brings us to our second audience comment section on non-agenda items. Do we have anybody signed up? Nope, not now. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our meeting. Can I get a motion to close the meeting, please? Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.